The following content may contain scenes that may disturb some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey everyone, Dr. from Robotnik here. Last time we took a look at Twisted Metal's humble beginnings and the awkward middle school years. Now, obviously a lot of people did not like 3 and 4. Personally, I thought 4 was alright, but 3 was kind of shit. However, Sony decided to get the original team back to make another Twisted Metal, as they had formed a new studio called Incognito Entertainment. The end result was Twisted Metal Black, which was a radical reinventing of the wheel. So, what made Incognito decide that they needed to reinvent the wheel drastically for Twisted Metal Black? Let's go and dive into this. I have a crazy history with this game, because I remember this was like one of the first games my dad got for his PS2 back in the day. But it wasn't until I was like 10 years old that I was able to take a look at the stories, due to this game having more horror-oriented stories. So obviously when I was a wee lad, I couldn't see the stories. But somehow this game did not fuck me up when I was 10, and I still don't know how the hell why. Let's dive right into this game, because I have a lot to fucking say. Originally, this game was supposed to be called Twisted Metal Road Trip and be more in line with Twisted Metal 2, but this was scrapped extremely early on in development, with the only remnant of this concept being this piece of concept art on David Jeffy's Twitter account. I presume this was done due to 3 and 4's excessive cartoony tone, which had alienated a lot of gamers. Incognito decided that the best way to give Twisted Metal its big redemption was to go back to the drawing board and reinvent the wheel. They decided to go for a more darker and horror-oriented take, which ended up making this the first entry to gain an M rating from the ESRB, which was very well deserved. Despite the intentions to make this game a lot darker, there were frequent fights with Sony over the content of this game out of potential fears and controversies due to these themes being somewhat uncommon for gaming at the time, and some stories were censored as a result, most notably doll faces. You can find the original stories on this video, which has the beta cutscenes. The voices are kinda crap, but they're placeholder voice acting, so it's not a big deal. The game also set out to take advantage of the PS2 hardware to make a Twisted Metal experience like no other, so bigger levels and more enemies are the name of the game, alongside a silky smooth 60 frames per second. Twisted Metal Black was released on June 18, 2001 for the PS2. It sold about 950,000 copies, and received critical acclaim from critics and gamers alike, averaging around 9s and 10s from most major outlets, receiving praise for its dark tone, interesting characters, and amazing gameplay, with many considering this the best game in the series. Now, let's hop into the story. As I said earlier in the video, this game's story is extremely bleak, and may contain scenes that may make viewers uncomfortable. It's so bleak that the story was actually cut from the PAL versions of the game. I'm going to go into detail for this game's story, so if any of that bothers you, or you wish to go in the story unspoiled, I highly suggest you skip to this timestamp right here. This is your last warning, and if you wish to stay, viewer discretion is advised. Without further ado, let's dive into the world of Twisted Metal Black. Unlike prior games, this game takes place in an alternate continuity to the main series. This game takes place in the fictional city of Midtown, a rundown city filled with pollution and corruption. This continuity's Calypso still holds a traditional Twisted Metal tournament, but its background is far more mysterious than the main series. This game goes for a more darker take on the Twisted Metal formula, as most of the contestants in this game come from Blackfield Asylum, and have some sort of tragic past or major dysfunction that pushes them to compete in the tournament. When you play through the story, you'll see a prologue that gives a vague hint of why the contestant enters the tournament, their backstory in the middle, alongside the wish in the ending. Our contestants for this tournament are as follows. Billy Ray Stillwell was a simple farmer out in the country, living with his high school sweetheart, Annie. One day when he was out checking his crops, an unscheduled crop dusting occurred, which had nearly killed him. Several hours later, he woke up to find his crop field dead and his face severely deformed. Panicked, he rushes back to the farm to see if Annie has any idea what to do, but he soon finds his wife making out with the pilot, talking about how they'll collect the life insurance. His heart and mind snapped in two at that point, when he found out he was the victim of both cheating and an attempted murder. Enraged, he beats Annie to death with a hoe, while the pilot runs off. He was eventually shipped to Blackfield, where he constantly wishes for the day he can get revenge on the pilot that took everything from him. He enters the tournament hoping to find the pilot and kill him. He drives the Junkyard Dog, a tow truck that he used for a second income to help stranded motorists. Jebediah, or as the game calls him, Preacher, was an evangelist that traveled from town to town sharing his religious visions with anyone willing to listen. However, his pursuit to become an ordained priest had led many of his followers to deem him a fanatic driven by madness. One fateful night, a couple asked him to perform an exorcism on their infant child. But the event went horribly wrong, causing the preacher himself to become possessed, and he butchered the entire congregation. He was arrested immediately after that and sent to the Blackfield, where the demon torments him day and night. Calypso promises to reveal the truth should he win the tournament. He drives Brimstone, an El Camino that serves as his traveling church. In case you're not convinced that there's more to Preacher's madness, his special weapon is a suicide bomber that launches himself towards the target due to Preacher convincing his followers that those that refuse to believe deserve death. Agent Stone was a SWAT officer with a desire to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. One thing that was notable about him was his absolute hatred of criminals and terrorists, and a rage that was eventually bound to erupt. This rage eventually consumed him during a hostage situation, where in a fury, he killed every single skinhead terrorist with extreme prejudice. Once he got a closer look though, he realized he also killed a family in the crossfire, and immediately tried to kill himself out of guilt. But he couldn't do so. This traumatic experience had him sent to Blackfield, where the guilt eats at him every day. He, out of desperation, enters Calypso's tournament hoping to undo his horrible mistake and make everything right. He drives Outlaw, his SWAT chief from the days in the Force. Mr. Grimm in this game isn't the Grim Reaper this time, but rather a veteran of the Vietnam War. He and his friend Benny were drafted straight out of high school, and during one fateful night, Benny was wounded by gunfire, and both of them were captured. Grimm kept pleading for help for days until an advisor for the Vietnamese approached their prison, with a unique idea for torture: starvation. He then tossed a knife into the hole and told Grimm the only way he'll survive is to eat whatever he can find, him fully intent to break Grimm's spirit. Benny died from his wounds a few days later, and Grimm out of desperation caved and ate Benny's flesh just to survive, keeping the skull as a helmet. This event horribly shattered Grimm's mind, causing him to develop cannibalistic tendencies. Grimm was eventually rescued by his allies, but when they attempted to remove the skull, he killed him in a fit of rage. This caused them to ship him to Blackfield Asylum, where he rotted for 30 years, and the cravings kept getting stronger. He enters the tournament hoping to get revenge on the advisor for shattering his mind. He pilots the motorcycle that he stole from his commanding officer. John Doe is a mysterious individual with an unknown past, with the only clues being his tattoos and extremely vague memories. One memory that's his strongest is that he was a gang of neo-Nazis that initially did nothing more than random muggings and petty crimes until they were fed up with being considered nobodies. They then decided they wanted to be feared, so they came up with a plan to destroy the Midtown Center of Disease Control, to unleash a bunch of diseases to cause the collapse of society. But the memories end there. He enters the tournament hoping to get answers of who he actually is, as Calypso showed him a photo that might paint a different story, but Willie likes what he finds. He pilots Roadkill, a vehicle made out of various scraps that is just as mysterious as he is, but all that's known for is that it's his to drive. Frank McCutcheon, or No Face, was a small-time boxer. He wasn't a guy that won every fight, but he was a fan favorite whenever he came out to play. One night, he severely underestimated his opponent and got flat-out destroyed in the ring, getting severe facial injuries. Unable to afford a better doctor, a few of his peers in the gym recommended a back-alley doctor named Dr. Hatch that could fix him right up. He was also a big fan of the fights as well, but unbeknownst to Frank, he ended up losing 20 grand on him in a bet. The doctor then fixed him up, but he also mutilated him in the process due to being really pissed about losing that money. No Face then tore up the hospital looking for the doctor, but killed 3 innocent people by mistake. He enters the tournament hoping to get even with the doctor that literally tore his face off. He pilots Crazy 8, a Court 810 that his father won in a title bout. Bloody Mary is a woman that was always a bridesmaid and never the bride. Her earliest memory of her terrible luck was when she was a child. She told a boy that she liked him, but the boy shoved her into a pile of mud. From that moment, Mary was never the same and had developed a temper, but her meds kept her from acting on it. One fateful event, she was at her friend Kristen's wedding, but out of spite, Kristen threw the bouquet at her. Mary at that point hadn't been taking her meds, so her mind snapped, causing her to grab the knife for the wedding cake and murdered Kristen on the spot. From that point onwards, she wore Kristen's blood-soaked wedding dress. She was then sent to Blackfield Asylum and left to rot until Calypso offered her the chance to find her Prince Charming. She pilots Spectre, a sports car that she stole from one of her friend's weddings that was intended as a gift for the bride. Dollface is a very meek woman with a horrifically traumatic childhood, where her mother died when she was very young, and her father took his anger out on her. After she finished college, she worked as an intern for a mask maker named Mr. Creel, a man who ends up reminding her of her father. One day, she accidentally spilled coffee over some of his documents, and Mr. Creel decided to be a civil and reasonable person with his punishment. And by that, I mean he created a mask, nailed it to her face, and sealed it shut with a key, just to make sure the mask would never come off. Leaving her to die, she was eventually found and shipped to Blackfield Asylum. She enters the tournament when Calypso shows her the key to her freedom. Originally, her story was set to be much darker, as in the beta cutscenes, Mr. Creole is actually her father, who is heavily implied to be the one that killed her mother and sealed Dollface in the mask in a fit of rage for making a bit of noise. Dollface pilots Darkside, a semi-truck that she stole from a trucker that she hitched a ride from. Raven may look like your typical angsty teenager, but her angst is heavily justified by her tragic backstory. She and her best friend Kelly were relatively well-adjusted introverted teens with an interest in the occult. They despised the popular in-crowd at her school due to how frequent they would be picked on by them, wondering why they wouldn't just leave them the hell alone. One day after school let out for them, Raven and Kelly decide to use their tarot cards on the pier to see if a boy Kelly liked felt the same way, but Raven draws the death card. Despite the inaccuracy of the drawing, it was an omen of things to come, as the bullies followed them to the pier and dangled them over the pier, wanting to see if a witch could swim. Raven protested that Kelly didn't know how to swim, but they didn't listen and dropped Kelly into the ocean below. Raven was unable to save her, as she didn't know how to swim either, and was forced to witness her death. Her parents sent her to Blackfield due to her extreme grief, where she spends the days in Blackfield hoping to get even with the bullies that destroyed her life. Calypso offers her the very chance, and she accepts it without hesitation. She pilots Shadow, a stolen hearse that delivered Kelly to the funeral home. This vehicle also allows Raven to tap into her true powers for a hidden special weapon. Charlie Cade returns to this game. Sorta. In this game, his younger son is the focal character of their story. He was an average boy that was respectful to his elders and brought home good grades, but everyone was wary of the Cade family due to his older brother, Needles. However, that couldn't stop their strong bond as they were best friends. Charlie would even frequently take his son with him to work. However, one night would forever change their world radically as a mugger shot Charlie in the head, killing him immediately. The child was horrified at what happened, but he quickly figured death couldn't separate them for long. Due to him being a mechanical savant, he constructed a device that allows him to reanimate his father's corpse. Many people don't like this and they feel that it's weird and they need to bury the father. But Calypso makes an offer to make everything better, so the boy enters the tournament. He pilots Yellow Jacket, the very taxi that Charlie used for work and was murdered in. Axel was a very proud husband, and his wife was in his entire world. One day when he wasn't looking, his wife was kidnapped. Eventually, he received several packages containing various body parts of his wife. Consumed with survivor's guilt, he desires nothing more than to find the man that killed his wife and get revenge. Which is why he enters the tournament. The machine he pilots is a device that he created as punishment for his wife's death, where he rides it to shred the bottoms of his feet as his penance. Cage is a man that desires to become the greatest serial killer of all time, but he feels that his empathy gets in the way. Calypso promises to remove his empathy should he win the tournament, and he jumps at the opportunity. He pilots Warthog, which in this game is a station wagon attached to tank treads. Black is a mysterious creature that's sent to compete in the tournament to find and kill Calypso by a mysterious party. It's theorized that he's the same Black from Twisted Metal 1, but there's no official confirmation of that outside of being teased in Twisted Metal Lost, which we'll get to that next video. He pilots Manslaughter, a dump truck that's heavily armored and modified for combat. And last but certainly not least is Needles Cade himself. This game is probably without a doubt the most evil incarnation of him yet, as this game features no humor associated with him whatsoever, and plays him completely straight and for horror with great effect. He's a notorious serial killer that's feared throughout the entirety of Midtown. Some of these people were hunted down meticulously, others were chosen at random. Eventually, his crime spree was stopped as he was arrested and sent for an execution. In the observation room, Jebediah was there. Needles paid him no mind and assumed that he was just there to save his soul, but he was far from correct. As a switch was flipped, Preacher asked God to curse Needles and place the fires of hell on his head. This caused Needles to bust out of the chair and kill 4 cops in a frenzy. He was then shipped to Blackfield, where he was left to rot as he was deemed a lost cause. 3 months have passed, and the curse has gotten worse and further driven him further into insanity. Calypso then enters his cell, but Needles wanted to kill him then and there. However, Calypso made an offer to undo the curse, and as a result, Needles decides to play along for now, as he can always kill Calypso later. He pilots Sweet Tooth, an ice cream truck that he used to lure his victims with its whimsical nature. The truck can also turn into a motherfucking transformer, which is badass. The story of this game is phenomenal. As you fight through your character's story, you see their thoughts during the loading screens, which gives them a lot of perspective on them. It's honestly tragic for some of them, as they're only competing in this tournament just out of desperation. Some of them don't even want to do this. The tournament here takes them throughout the entirety of Midtown, and as a result, goes through many generic areas such as a junkyard, the suburbs, the freeway, the highway, downtown, the prison passage, the snowy mountain roads, a drive-in, and a group of abandoned skyscrapers. However, outside of the junkyard, the prison passage, the skyscrapers, and for the middle part of the story at Minion Stadium, you can select where you go. During the middle of the tournament, your character will come face to face with Minion, who in this game is a mysterious man that won the prior tournament. When you beat him, you get the middle cutscene that reveals your character's past. At the end of the tournament, you're not out of the woods yet, as you have to fight Warhawk, an assault helicopter, as he attempts to bring you to justice. Once you destroy Warhawk, you get your character's ending, which a good amount of these are just fairly depressing or cathartic depending on your character. Some of them give a good feeling of revenge like No Face, where he dishes out some well-deserved revenge in the perfect way possible, or Raven, where she cleverly has a way to get revenge on the jerks that killed our friend. But then there's just tragic ones like Brimstone.
I made no promise to clear your name, he said. I only promised to show you the truth. And the truth, he said, was that the demon wasn't real. The voice inside me was a figment of my imagination. My God, it was all in my mind. The exorcism? It wasn't an exorcism at all. It was simply a baptism. It was Judgment Day in that church, and I was the angel of death. The truth had been delivered indeed, but not by God, but by Calypso. A man cannot hide from himself. There is only one path before him.
That's right, Brimstone was never possessed the entire time. He was just insane. And for the cherry on top, this cutscene was even darker in the beta version, where you see him exorcise the demon by drowning the fucking baby in the baptismal. And I think one of the most poignant endings in this game is Axel, where he finds his wife's killer in the ending.
It was him, that freak in the ice cream truck. He was always around the neighborhood. If I had not been more careful, I should have said something was wrong. It was my fault. Maybe I was really the one to blame for my wife's death. But then, he spoke to me.
Your wife, she didn't die easy. You should know, she begged for you as I killed her.
The clown is dead, but so is my wife. I will never be free.
That last sentence still gives me the chills. It's one of the few endings where it just shows how utterly hollow revenge actually is. Despite the depressing and grim nature of these, they work really well and feel ahead of the time, despite the censorship, as what got through certainly is no picnic. These stories are also narrated by your character, which means Calypso never gets to directly speak, which is kind of a bummer, as in most games he's usually the most entertaining character. But considering how phenomenal these stories are, that's a minor complaint. When you beat the game with everyone, you unlock Minion. Minion doesn't have any cutscenes, but that's not to say he doesn't have a story. In fact, he arguably has the most important story in the game. Unlike everyone else, Minion's loading screens are all in cipher language. When you properly translate the code, it reads, "I do not think this is real. I must speak in code or else you will discover me. We are trapped in his head. This is how he sees the world, how Sweet Tooth sees his life. It is not real. All of us are trapped in his head. I miss the old colorful world. We will return to our world one day. In the real world, my name is Marcus Kane." That's right. This is far from just a mere alternate continuity. In fact, this game is heavily implied to be how Sweet Tooth sees the world, and it's even further implied that this game is just one gigantic fever dream. Not only that, this game reveals that Marcus Cade is the split personality in Needles himself. Fun fact, This twist was actually a super last-minute addition to the game, as Jaffe had a major case of the flu, and he was running out of time to give Minion some cutscenes. So, as a quick fix, they added a code language just to simply give Minion some story. Who knew that such a last-minute twist would end up being probably one of the best video game plot twists of all time, as it works out surprisingly well and fits the psychological horror aspect of this game extremely well. Now with all that out of the way, let's talk about the presentation. This game for an early PS2 title looks fucking great. Yeah, it's mostly browns and grays, but considering the tone of this game, I'd say it honestly fits. If this game had the color of Twisted Metal 2, it would feel very jarring. The performance for the game is also at a consistent 60 frames per second with very little, if any, performance drops, which is amazing. Just the action is all uninterrupted, which is awesome. A neat little attention to detail in this game is that the cars will have little compartments for whatever weapon you have currently equipped, and the compartments will activate, which is pretty cool as it arms the weapon. Also, the drivers run out of the vehicle when the vehicle is destroyed, which adds to the mayhem. There's also traffic on the road and fully 3D pedestrians, which add to the mayhem of this game. It just shows how many innocents are caught in the crossfire. The cutscenes are also presented in a slideshow fashion, but they work excellently well thanks to the minimalistic storytelling and the excellent voiceover narrations from the characters. You just feel the despair of the contestants. The sound design also forgoes the heavy metal of the prior games and goes for more of an orchestral and ambient sound, and it works well. Although the soundtrack just sells the despair of this game very well. The credits is also set to the Rolling Stones classic Painted Black, which is an excellent choice for the game and fits the montage and clips in the credits very well, considering the song's depressing tone. Also, I love the menu in this game too, where it actually just shows the tournament going on in the background. You just see the mayhem. It just adds a lot to this. Like, this game's presentation is fucking phenomenal. In fact, one of my favorite bits of this game is how you actually can look at the character bios, or instead of it being like a bio that tells you what the character is, it's instead like a patient profile of Blackfield Asylum, which adds to the immersion of the game very well. One minor complaint I do have about the presentation is that the bonus characters cutscenes look a little cheap, but from what I've heard, they practically were out of money at that point, so what are you gonna do? Now with that out of the way, let's talk about the most important part of the game, the gameplay. As stated before, this game runs at 60 frames per second, which allows the combat to feel far faster than before, which is one of the biggest and most obvious changes to the game. Other than that, it's the same old kill everyone you meet before they kill you that we've seen before, but this time we actually have proper environmental weapons, which not only can be discarded on levels that don't have environmental weapons, but they feel a lot better to use, like the bomber in the junkyard or the thunderstorm in the suburbs. We also get a new weapon to play with a special weapon that doesn't stack, but it has 3 modes: reticles, satellites, and zoomies. Zoomies are the easiest to use, as they fire 10 missiles in a sequence, and if they all hit, you get a damage bonus. A satellite launches into the air, and if you detonate it at the last minute and hit the bullseye, you get massive damage. Finally, there's the reticle, which this weapon has to lock on the opponent, and it also has to charge up. But if it's fully charged and you hit the opponent, it can cause massive damage, to the point where it can even one-hit KO weaker armored enemies. But it's a very difficult to use weapon, but very awesome at the same time. All the special weapons are extremely fun to use and very creative. The napalm was also reworked into the gas can, where you can determine where it lands by detonating it, and if it hits dead center, you get a damage bonus. The car balance also feels really good, which is also excellent. And you can determine your path in the game at stage 2, 3, and 6, which adds some replay value to this game. However, there is a caveat to this. This game is considered by many fans and critics to be the hardest entry in the series, and for good reason. The AI in this game is relentless, and they will hunt you down like nobody's business. And you also have to fight 7 to 9 enemies on every stage. Normally this isn't a problem, as most of the stages are really big, but this comes to a head in the stage 6, where you have to decide between snowy roads or the drive-in theater. These are both very small arenas with very little room to move around in, with a bunch of enemies that want you dead. Drive-in theater is especially bad about this, as it doesn't even have a recharge station, and there are very little health pickups as well. I'd argue this is the worst part of the entire single-player campaign by far. Fuck! My advice, never, ever pick drive-in theater, and always pick the snowy roads. Not only does this level have recharge stations, it also has a decent environmental weapon, which allows you to help pick off enemies. It has better weapons, and you also have some choke points to hide behind, which makes this a lot easier to survive in. Health pickups also only restore about 5% health, but they respawn frequently, so you need to collect them in stacks for significant heals, but they do respawn. As while recharge stations do exist, You can only use them twice per round until they're done for good, but they give a full heal in exchange, so you need to use them wisely. And that's not even getting into this game's boss fights, where both of them are tough puzzle bosses. Minion has a shield that has to be disabled by destroying 4 panels, and the back panel is always a massive pain in the ass to destroy. And this game has probably the toughest incarnation of Minion yet, as his special is capable of destroying you immediately if you're careless. And the final boss, Warhawk, is definitely no slouch either. Before I even go into how this boss is hard, let's let this set the tone. He was originally supposed to be a playable character, even having a dummied out selection on the main menu, but he was scrapped immediately as they couldn't find any feasible way to nerf him in any reasonable way. Keep in mind, that didn't stop Sweet Tooth from being playable in 4, and he's broken as shit. Warhawk has a shield with him, but he also brings along tankers, which are basically degraded minions. In order to destroy the shield, you need to detonate 3 tankers near Warhawk, then you need to be very careful and keep moving to avoid Warhawk's missiles while you whittle away his health. Do not attempt to fight him without readying your shield, as Warhawk will chew you up and spit you out. Despite this, none of the bosses, I would argue, are cheap, like Sweet Tooth was in 4, as they lack the terrifying power of the Henchman, and if you actually play it safe, you can beat them just fine. They require skill. Not to also mention that I would argue this game gives you more of a fighting chance than the prior games, as every time you clear a level, it resets your lives back to 2, which makes this game far more fair. You also get to save after every level like in 4, but 4 saved your immediate lives. So, you could be fucked in that game compared to here. Also, as long as you know what you're doing and have your abilities ready, this game never feels cheap. It's tough, but it's fair. By comparison, I would argue 2 was a cheaper game because 2 had moments of genuine bullshit. Here, while it's hard, outside a drive-in theater, I never found myself crying foul. Most of the difficulty felt genuine. It was skill-based, which makes this game pretty cool to do when you master it. In fact, some people might consider this game being pretty hard a selling point. I personally like the challenge in this game. Some of the unlocks kinda suck, but the worst of them are usually just multiplayer exclusive levels, and even then, they aren't too much of a pain. Once single player gives you your fill as always, you can hop on a deathmatch and have a grand old time with your buddies. You got traditional deathmatches for up to 4 players with decent performance and food as well, but you also get last man standing, which is a kind of fun endurance mode, where basically both you and player 2 pick 4 vehicles and the last man standing wins. It's kind of fun. All in all, this game is super solid and sure to bring a lot of fun. This game was so fun, it had an online-only expansion called Twisted Metal Black Online that still sees regular play to this day on third-party servers, which is fucking wild. That should show you how dedicated this community is to this game. This game is 21 years old and still sees regular play on third-party servers. Not bad for a game this old. It's also only $10 on the PlayStation Network, so it's worth picking up to have a great time. It goes on sale for nothing, so you have no reason not to play this game. Yeah, the game's kinda tough, but it has enough that makes it fair to play, and some people consider that a selling point. With some of the tightest gameplay, amazing stories, and fun as hell multiplayer, I award Twisted Metal Black a 10 out of 10. So yeah, with Twisted Metal back on track, with an awesome next-gen experience, a sequel to Twisted Metal Black seemed like the most logical step. However, let's not get hasty. After all, the PlayStation 1 still had some life left, so they all thought, what if someone didn't upgrade to the PS2? They're not left in the dust, but this is a weird instance. This is a kid-oriented spin-off?